As you think over your summer, you probably had one. And as you go into fall, you probably have one for the future. And that is that we all have plans. You didn't go through summer without thinking about what you wanted to do. And as we transition into the fall and school kicking off and all of these things, we probably have a plan of what we think or hope is going to take place, right? I mean, it could be a lot of things. There's all kinds of plans that we have. There's business plans, there's wedding plans, ministry plans, and vacation plans. There's exercise plans, school plans, job plans, retirement plans, holiday plans, even dinner plans. It's pretty difficult to go into the future without thinking or planning something. And so we all have plans. If you talk to some of the students at this point in summer, you will hear that they have probably a well-laid plan, like what school, what classes, what grades, and what goals they intend to accomplish by the end of June of next year. If you talk to a couple of the young adults in our congregation who are soon, in the next month, heading off to overseas missions, you talk to them and they'll tell you what their plan is, all the preparations that they have to make, what they need, when they need it, and how to do it. And so all of these things, all of these people have plans. And even those of us who aren't leaving town for school or missions or other things, we are planning to get right back into our routines of regular life in the fall, which could impact how we use our mornings or what we do at work or parenting or exercise or church. Speaking of church, we as a staff and as the elders and as a church, we have plans to kick off and relaunch our regular ministries. And we have certain times, certain places, and things like that we have already in our plans. And although the heat of summer is not yet gone, it won't be long before we are planning Christmas holidays and who we're going to see and how we're going to celebrate. It's just part of life. We always are making plans about what we intend to do, what we hope to do, because life keeps going. And so whether it's for the next 5 years or the next 5 hours, whether you just think about it and go, or you sit down and you write everything out and color code all of your tasks, you have plans in your life. Yet even in the most detailed, the most thoughtful, the most strategic and calculated decisions and planning that you could possibly make, it's possible that you may be sinning. And if you don't believe me, let's read James chapter 4, verse 13 to 17. James says, "Come now, you who say, 'Today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town, spend a year there, and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. But as it is, you boast in your arrogance, and all such boasting is evil. And so whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin." As we begin to look at these verses, I actually want to start where it ends. And I want you to look back at verse 17. It's actually a really solid piece of wisdom that you can take with you. It says, whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do that, for that person, it is sin. And I think generally speaking, a lot of times we are quicker to seek forgiveness for the evil that we commit more than the good that we omit. And I think that it's important for us to see that even the good things that we ought to do, that God calls us to do, and we don't do it, for us it is sin. And we need to think about that. But before you take that verse and just run with it, I want to remind you that James, out of all the Bible, writes it here. He actually attaches it to a specific scenario where these people, these Christians, are to do something that they so often fail to remember to do. And I think it's the same thing for us, that when we are in the context here of making plans for the future, we can make really solid plans. And yet at the same time find that we are lacking something. We are not doing something good that we ought to. And so that's what we need to look for here today. Come now, he says in verse 13. You who say, and then he describes a plan. So if you are someone who has made a plan or still make plans, this is for you. We all need to understand what James is going to tell us here because it's for those who are planning something. And as we read it, we're going to notice that he gives an example. He doesn't give all the specific details, but he gives an examples. Someone might say this in verse 13. Today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town. We will spend a year there. We will trade and make a profit. And so to those of you who make plans like this, with the details and all of these things, James says, in your planning, you might be sinning. And I don't see it first reading, right? You read it and you think, well, where is the evil that he's talking about? It's not very obvious. In fact, you look at this plan, you really analyze it, and you think, wow, this is actually a well-laid plan because all the pieces are in place. Just take a look at what they've considered. They planned when they're going to do this. It says that it will be today or tomorrow. They planned what they're going to do. They say, we will go, and there's more to it than that, but they're going to go. They planned where they will do it, in such and such a town, fill in the blank. They planned how long that they will be gone for. It estimates that they will spend a year there. And not only have they planned how they're going to accomplish their goal, that is, by trading or buying or selling, but they also have a planned goal in mind. That is, we will make a profit. So all in all, I think that this is a really good business plan, don't you think? You read it and you think all the pieces are there. And so what I want to know as I read this is, what is the sin that's here? What is the sin with this plan? Is it wrong to make plans in the first place? No. Because planning, nor the depth of details that he talks about here are a problem. He doesn't say that that's wrong. Oh, maybe it's the financial profit that they're seeking. But James, again, he neither condemns making a profit or even doing business in the first place. That's not the problem here. So what is the problem? And we need to remember that we're looking for something, not something wrong that they've done, but something right that they haven't done. Something is missing in this plan. And so James wants to get our attention. He says, if you make plans in your life, and you can be as detailed as you want, you all make plans. You plan your day, you plan your week, you plan your year. You might plan on going to the gym. You might plan on going to church each week or what you're going to eat for dinner. You plan on getting projects done at work, at school, at home. We plan vacations. We plan what we want to accomplish each and every year. We have Bible reading plans, workout plans, business plans, wedding plans. And there's nothing wrong in and of that in itself. But if we keep reading, James begins to lay the groundwork regarding the problem in our planning. What something is missing. We take so many different variables into account. We think ahead and we think, okay, so this is our plan. If this happens, then we'll do this. And if that happens, then we'll do this. And so we have all of these variables in life, things that we can't control. And we say, okay, I'm going to make it so that this plan will be foolproof. If anything happens, we've got it covered. But verse 14 and following points to the most significant thing that we don't plan for. The thing that will impact every single plan, every single detail of your plan, and we often fail to even acknowledge that it is a thing. He says, you make these fantastic plans, yet you do not even know what tomorrow will actually bring. You don't know. Now, I want you to know that in the Greek language, I know sometimes it's complicated, but there's a reason for this. There are three main words that they use for knowledge or to know something. One of the words means to know something pretty well. Let's say like a friend. You know a lot about your friend, or you know about something, maybe a sport or whatever you're interested in. You know a lot about that, and you can talk about it. There's another word that they use in Greek that would be a knowledge of how things work, or more of an expert kind of knowledge about something specific, and so you'd be like a specialist in your field. That would be someone who knows a lot or everything about one thing. But then the third word that they use is actually, they call it knowledge, but it's actually very, very little. It's the shallowest amount of knowledge that you can have. And I think of, the Amazon delivery guy who you might recognize and say, oh, I know where they're from or what they're doing, but I really know nothing about them. That's the kind of knowledge that James is talking about here. He's not saying you don't know everything about tomorrow. He's not saying you don't know a lot about tomorrow. He's actually saying you really don't know anything about what tomorrow would bring. You cannot predict it. You cannot know exactly what is going to happen in the future. But I think that's why we make plans in the first place, isn't it? Because we can't control it. We don't know, we can't guarantee what's going to happen at all. But because we don't know, that's why James is saying there is pride in your plan. You don't know what's going to happen, and yet, as we read the verse or the plan in verse 13, there's an emphasis that James gives, and it's the we will. We will do this. It is a plan, and it's as if nothing will stop them from what they're planning to do. They're saying this out loud to other people, and they're saying, here's what I'm going to do. And it actually, in the original, it has we will before every single part of it. And so we read it like this. Today or tomorrow, we will go into such and such a town, and we will spend a year there, and we will trade, and we will make a profit. And so you read it like that, and it becomes a little more arrogant, doesn't it? There is some boasting involved in this plan. This is what I'm doing, and that's the problem that James has with this plan here. If you jump to verse 16, you hear how he thinks of this plan. He says, as it is, or how you are currently planning, you are boasting in your arrogance. They're so confident in their plan that they brag about it. They're saying this to people. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's what we will do, as if nothing will stop them, as if they are in control, as if nothing will keep them from achieving and receiving what they hope to accomplish, what they hope to get. And James says, literally, they boast in their arrogances. Yes, it's plural, which implies that all their plans and even every specific part of their plan is arrogant. And the reason why is because of verse 14. You don't have the slightest clue what's going to happen even tomorrow. I think James has in mind, as his mind is filled with scriptures, Proverbs 27 verse 1, which says, do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring. That is in the wisdom of the Bible. Do not boast about tomorrow. Don't brag about it. Don't be arrogant like you know what's going to happen, because you don't know what a day will bring. I think many of us have experienced this almost every day, perhaps, when you look back and you think, I didn't plan that. I didn't expect that. So it's good wisdom. So what we're dealing with here is not ignorance. If you don't know what tomorrow will bring, that is not your fault. But arrogance is your fault. And he says we need to deal with that. Now, verse 14 doesn't just talk about tomorrow. He actually talks about your entire existence. You don't know what tomorrow will bring, but you don't know your whole life then. He asks the question, what is your life? And if you think about life as a human being, what image or what would you compare it to? The way you think about life, you might have an idea in your head. It will tell you how you probably live your life. If you ask James comes up with an analogy. He says that our lives are like a mist. They appear for a little time, and then they vanish. I don't know if that's what you thought of, but that's what the Bible says. And he's not the first wise person to say that. If you go look in Job, who was also wise, he believed that life is but a breath. That's it. That's how he sees it. David concluded in Psalm 39 that our days are best measured with hands, a few hands long. And before God, the eternal one, Psalm 78 states that our whole lifetime is as nothing. Psalm 102 believes our days vanish as quickly as smoke. So I wonder, how are you thinking about your life? How would you describe life? If you had to compare it to something, what would you say? I think most of us would have assumed that it was longer than what the Bible is saying. We think of it as much longer than the way that the Bible is describing it here. What about unwatered grass while you were on vacation? What about the bouquet of flowers that you're given and quickly are throwing away? What about a shadow? There's so many different things that the Bible uses that we need to grasp onto because we so quickly think that we're in control and we have a long life ahead of us. And yet the Bible says that's not the case. That's not necessarily the case. So if you look around, if you really open your eyes while you're living, you might see things that could remind you of the fleeting nature of life. You might see, your breath when it's cold outside. That's an image of life. You could see the dew on the morning grass, and then it's gone. You could see steam boiling up from the water and then disappearing. You could spray an air freshener in your house, and it's just here and gone. If those don't resonate with you, think of it this way. Life is as temporary as a clean house with kids. I don't know why it's so easy to think that we are in control of our lives. We just do. We think we have the power. We do things. We plan things and say, this is going to happen. I'm going to make sure that it happens. And yet when we compare this with the eternal one who created us, the one who knows our innermost being, who molded us like clay in our mother's womb, he not only knows our days, he is the one who predetermined their number. And so James here wants to contrast between the way we think of ourselves as a mist and the way that we think of God, who is really in control, as the sovereign king, the eternal one. And I don't know, if you read the Bible, you can see this everywhere. It's everywhere, all throughout the scriptures. And what I want to do this morning, just for a few minutes here, is to show you, give you a sample of scriptures that will help us think. And as we consider what they say about God, that we would then reorient our plans, the ones that we have already and the ones that we will make in the future, to align with the biblical perspective of our lives. And there's going to be quite a few, so don't try to write them down. Just listen to them, consider the truth, and think about how it should impact your plans ahead. In Genesis 1:1, already from the beginning, God is there, not you, God. And it says that he created everything in the heavens and the earth. So that Nehemiah will say that it is he who sustains all of it. We are not the ones in control of this world. God is in control. And Hebrews 1 also adds that, that Christ himself continually upholds the universe by the word of his power. It is Christ who is running this world and upholding it. And Colossians adds, he is before all things, and in him all things are holding together, including your life. And so in Acts 17, Paul will teach this. He says, in him, in God, we live and move and have our being. It is all dependent upon God. He is sovereign. He is the one who is in control of everything, even every tiny individual molecule in this universe that he creates and sustains. Sometimes we just need to let that wash over us, reminding us of how small we really are. And this is our God. He is in control. In fact, Job 34 applies it like this. He just says, if God should set his heart and gather to himself his spirit and his breath, if he took it all back, all flesh would perish together, and man would return to dust. God is in charge of our lives, not us. And we ought to plan like that's true. Everything that takes place, no matter how wonderful or how terrible, happens with God. God is in charge. Nothing surprises him because it never occurs outside of his purposes. And with omnipotent control, God is directing everyone, everything, every moment according to his purposes, his will, and not necessarily our will. In Ephesians chapter 1, it clarifies that God works all things according to the counsel of His will. So you think about nature, everything going on, even things we don't see. But you think of these storms that we've recently had, the lightning, the rain, the wind, all of these things, the clouds, the ice. Psalm 148 even includes hail as fulfilling His word. We're told in Psalm 104 that it is He who causes the grass to grow. We read this earlier. He grows the grass for the cattle. He's in charge. He's giving them food. He makes it grow for us so we can cultivate it and use it and eat it and distribute it. Matthew says that Jesus taught that God makes the sun rise, not us. He knows every bird. He feeds them all, and not one of them falls apart from His plan or His knowledge. There is no such thing as luck in this world. God is absolutely sovereign. So when you're playing a game at the family dinner table, God is in charge. It's true. Proverbs 16 explains, though you are the one who is casting the dice, it is God who is deciding how those dice fall. And from the dinner table all the way to the nations of this world, God is in control. Job 12 says that God makes nations great, and God is the one who destroys them. He enlarges them, and He leads them away. And Paul thinks about this from the very beginning. In Acts 17, he says that God made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth. He even allotted periods for them. Some nations are out of existence. And even the boundaries of their dwelling place, exactly where they would be. And at the front of these nations, at the governments of these nations, no matter how strong or determined they seem to be, the leaders of these nations, Proverbs 21 says, ultimately, that the king's heart, the leader of these people, the heart of the king is a stream of water in the hands of God. And He just turns it wherever He wills it to go. And since He made the king's heart, He also made our heart. He knows everything about us. He controls and wills for us our entire lives. So this is why Jesus taught us to ask for our food, even daily bread in Matthew 6. Everything from Him. And Philippians 4 says you need to trust in God who will supply every need of yours. You see how you and I are not in control of our lives? We feel like we are. We think we are. We act like we are, but we are not. Our success and our failure, our talents and our abilities, our opportunities, everything about our lives is in the hands of God. And I think Proverbs 16 clarifies this. It just simply says, the heart of man plans his way, but the Lord determines his steps. And I wonder if you believe this, if you live and plan your life as if this is true. Throughout the Bible, it's clear nothing happens or doesn't happen apart from God. Everything in this world. And within God's eternal purposes, our lives are just a brief breath. They are a vanishing vapor. They are a momentary mist. And if we live according to the biblical perspective, if we grasp that and humble ourselves, we will begin to see where we plan our lives, how arrogant we are when we think we're in control. I learned that there is a creature called a mayfly. A mayfly is apparently the creature with the shortest lifespan on Earth. It lasts maybe less than 24 hours. Now, I want you to imagine a mayfly flying up onto your shoulder and starts boasting in your ear about all their plans for the coming week, when they might even be dead before they finish talking. This is the arrogance, I think, that James is getting at. This is how we sound, our arrogance, our pride, our boasting in our plans to accomplish everything. We're going to do this. This is what's happening this week. This is what I'm going to do. I have no doubt that you have ideas for this afternoon and plans, intentions for the long weekend next week. Ideas about school and how that's going to go, plans for work and the next summer even, planning your vacation. But it is God, we need to get this, it is God who decides whether you wake up sick, whether your car even starts, whether you get a phone call that flips your world upside down in a moment. So you can understand why in verse 16, James says that all such planning, it's not the plan itself, it's what it's missing. That kind of planning is boastful. In fact, he calls it what it is. He says it is evil. Planning your life detached from the sovereignty of God, without the humility and submission that demands, is not just an oversight. It's not just a mistake. It's evil. Verse 17 implies believers should know better, and therefore, when they know this but don't do this, it's sin. So the question then is, what are we supposed to do? Right? If we get this, we are not God. God is God. He runs our lives. He runs the world. His will happen. So how do we make plans, or how are we supposed to live? Are we supposed to cancel everything that we have on the calendar? No. Are we supposed to just stop making plans and just let the will of God happen to us? No, that's not what he's saying. He says, he clarifies what you ought to do. And I want you to see what he says. In verse 13, he describes a person who says, and then it fill in the blank. He says, I will do this. This is my plan. But then in verse 15, he writes, instead of that, you ought to say something else. So the first person says something, the godly person says something a little bit different. He says, instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. Now, I want you to notice something. There's a similarity and there's a difference here. The first thing is the we will part is still there. He didn't negate the plan that they first made in verse 13. It's the we will. He still has it there. The plan is there. We will live and do this or that. So fill in the blanks. But the difference is that he added something. He added the good, the right thing that they didn't have before. He added a phrase, if the Lord wills. James expects that believers will use this phrase when they plan their lives. Now, you might think and hear this phrase, and you think, well, that's just an old-fashioned thing. We need to get back to the old days and say it like Christians used to say it a lot more often, if the Lord wills. If the Lord wills, or Lord willing. You might have heard that before from a different generation. We don't use it like they used to, but that's not the point. Not just to be like the old days. The other thing is, you're not supposed to make this a legalistic thing and think, well, now, okay, every time I say my plan, I have to start by saying, if the Lord wills. That it's a law now, and I'm required to do that. That's not what he's getting at. The point is that this statement, whether you say it out loud or you think it, but it's there, it's meant to impact the way that you think about the plans that you've made. That I think if you actually say it out loud, it forces you to remember and to reorient the way you think about your plans that you have. They don't have to change the plans, but it changes the way, the humility, the submission to God's sovereign will, which we say we believe. We recognize that in line with our plans. In other words, you could say that a good plan, the world will say, a good plan takes into consideration all the things that could happen or might not happen, the things that could change your plan. You have it all in place, and that's a good plan. But a godly plan includes humility and submission, that this may not all happen. And the reason why is because God is in control and I am not. And that he is good and wise and sovereign, and I trust that. So we still plan, but we do it with a posture of humility towards the one who's really going to carry them out. And I think that's why James says to add it at the front of your plans, not the end. It's not just add it afterwards. He says, if the Lord wills, that's where we start. Because if the Lord does not will, everything that comes after that will not happen. And so we are to think as if it starts with God. He says, only if the Lord wills, we will even live. We're not even at the plan yet. Are we going to be alive? We don't know what tomorrow will bring. We don't even know if we get tomorrow. So we need to be humble. We need to, even though it's uncomfortable to talk about death, there is no guarantee that you'll hear the end of this sermon. That's a reality, right? At least that's what we believe if God is ultimately in control and we are not. So it's sinful to live like God owes us, as we often think, like he owes us 75 years. And we're upset when he doesn't give us that. Now it's sinful. It's like a boasting mayfly. We made plans, God. I was going to do this, and now they changed. This is how we sound to the ears of God. How arrogant of us to live in a world that God creates, God sustains. He gives you your heart, your soul, your mind, your strength, your breath, and we turn around and live like he owes it to us. Like we got plans and he shouldn't stop them. Like he has no right to be involved in my plans or to change my plans. That is arrogance and that is pride. If life hasn't taught us that we don't know the future, the Bible surely does. He says, only if the Lord wills. It's not up to you, it's up to the Lord. If the Lord wills, you will be alive, or you won't. And if you're alive, he says, then you will do this, what you have planned, or you'll do that, something completely different. So here's the thing. You don't have to say, if the Lord wills, but you have to believe it. You have to live like you believe this truth. At the previous church that I worked at the end of the day, I would always say to one particular pastor, I'd say, see you tomorrow. And he would reply with a smile. He'd say, 80%. And the reason why he did that every day is because for all the other days before, we did see each other tomorrow, the next day. But there is the reality that God may have different plans. So in his mind, it was never 100%. It was 80%. Probably, but if the Lord wills. And so in his own way, he reminded himself, and I think the others who heard him, that God is in control, and he is not. And he made his plans accordingly. If the Lord wills, we will live, and then we will do this or that. The point is not that Christians have to recite a religious phrase before they announce their plans, or to even make a plan in the first place. The point is that Christians demonstrate their faith in humble acknowledgement and submissive recognition of God's sovereignty over their lives. We don't plan like the world. We know that there is a God who is in control and has better plans than we could ever imagine. And even still, we say, if the Lord wills. We think, if the Lord wills. And you can find a way to remind yourself in whatever way works. But we need to think this way, or else we sin. We are lacking something. We're not doing the right thing that we ought to do. How can we confess faith in Christ, the one who, in the anguish of a blood-sweating decision in the Garden of Gethsemane, he asked his Father for one thing, something different, and yet he fully surrendered to his Father. In Mark chapter 14, he said, not what I will, but what you will. And yet we refuse to allow God to change our plans, our business plans, our wedding plans, our vacation plans, our school plans, even our missions plans when they don't align with the good and wise and sovereign God. This is a battle for the will, your will or God's will. And one of the evidences that we have that the Spirit of God, the Spirit of Christ is working in us is that we begin to live more and more like Christ. And one of the evidences that that is taking place in our lives is seen in how you make plans with the understanding that God is in control and you are prepared to submit to whatever He wills, whatever that may be, because you love him above all.